Nicholas, welcome.
Thank you.
So for those of you who don't know, Nicholas Dacre is the Associate Professor of Project Management and the Director of the Advanced Research Centre at the University of Southampton. He's held a number of academic posts, and before that, he was a project manager for a government-funded data transfer project here in the UK. Nicholas believes that one of the most fundamental drivers in the field of project management will be the adoption and implementation of artificial intelligence and project data analytics. And by adopting these technologies, he believes that project professionals can gain a better understanding of the projects that we undertake and be able to make more accurate and better informed decisions. He was an obvious choice to author the Association for Project Managers 2022 research paper, Artificial Intelligence in Project Management, and I'll link to it below. And that is why I wanted to speak with you today, Nicholas, about how AI might impact the project management profession. So welcome to the channel.
Thank you ever so much, Mike, for that lovely introduction and summarising where I think we are. And obviously, I'm looking forward to having a conversation as to where we are going.
Let's start with where we are now. How is artificial intelligence making a difference to the way people are managing projects today? What do you actually see going on out there in the community?
So I think that's a really interesting question. I'll explain why I think that's an interesting question, because on a number of layers, and this is a question, surprisingly, that we as academics and myself obviously get asked quite a lot in terms of what is the reality of AI, artificial intelligence, and how is it being used, and how is it making a difference to projects in the current climate that we're experiencing? And it's a question that I've been asked for quite a number of years since obviously the research in this particular field started. And we have seen some differences in terms of some surges through the COVID pandemic, and where we saw quite a large number of project managers and project professionals change in the way that it adapted their modes of working and how they were operating, both in the UK and internationally. And my answer at this particular moment in time where we are today is we are at the early stages. We are at the very, very kind of start. And I think there is a realization of what the potential might be and where people are heading. But we are at the infancy, I would argue, of what is possible in terms of AI and project management. And just very briefly, what's really interesting in terms of AI is outside of the sphere of the project profession, it is fairly well established in terms of both research and practice. And it's only just fairly recently that the project profession has really kind of had some motivation, and this area has had some traction in terms of motivating project professionals, project organizations, large complex projects, mega projects, to really kind of delve into what is the possibility and what are the possibilities of engaging with this kind of technology or this phenomenon. So in answer to your question, having prefaced that, as I said, we are at the early stages. And one of the most significant areas as of today and recently is through fairly, what we would consider fairly kind of low level, but fundamental technologies, such as communication channels, such as the use of artificial chatbots to kind of keep teams connected and so on and so forth. So very briefly, we did some, and when I say we, it's obviously an academic team. I led a team that we did some research on with an organization outside of the UK, which was using this kind of AI technology quite prevalently. And they had established very quickly that this kind of automated chatbot tool was fantastic in terms of keeping all of their international project managers connected all the time.
Yeah.
And one of the questions I asked during these interviews, which really surprised me, I said to one of the project professionals, "Who do you report to? Who's your line manager?"
Yeah.
And the answer really surprised me, because the answer was, "Well, I actually don't report to anyone. My line manager is this chatbot, is this artificial intelligence." And I said, "Well, is that a source of kind of concern for you? Does it create tension?" And his answer was very much no. It's a source of support. And I said, well, what kind of things can you do with this? Well, he says, I can report in sick, for example, or it keeps track of my project, my milestones, for example, and all these types of things. So the point I want to make very briefly here is, actually, it's not just about chatbots where, as a customer, I might log into Amazon, for example, and try and find out how to return an item. Actually, what they were using was this artificial intelligence, which was highly, highly adaptable and was able to respond to the needs of the project professionals.
Yeah.
So in recap, I do think we are at the infancy of what is possible. But what is being executed and used is being done very, very well, and it's really exciting to see where it's going to take us.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. That it's very easy to think, where are the project management applications? But already we are seeing, if you like, management, productivity applications all over the place, and people possibly not even aware that they're using AI. When you ask Siri or Alexa what the time is in Washington, DC, because you're about to schedule a call, you're using an AI. And so it is, I think your point about its prevalence is interesting. But of course, along with the changes to all the technologies we use all day, every day, and the growth we can expect to see in them, I suspect we are going to see some dedicated project management applications because it's a big market out there. So what changes do you foresee? And I don't know about you, and so you must set the limits. But in my mind, I'm thinking of 3 to 5 years as being kind of the midterm, if the near term is next year or so, and 5 to 10 years as being long term. So let's start off with, how would you define the midterm, and what changes do you foresee in that?
So I think in terms of the midterm, in terms of like 3, so we'll gradually, and I'm very confident in saying actually this is certainly a phenomenon that is going to happen. That is in terms of the prediction, the technology is growing in the background, and there have been a different number of stages to get us to where we are currently in 2022, going into 2023, for example. And you may have discussed this with your audience before on YouTube, but AI has gone through this kind of process of the seasons of like the AI winter, where there seems to be less interest in artificial intelligence, in the AI summer, and we are certainly in the kind of this resurgence of interest. But a lot of that is due to the fact that there are large organizations, your Microsofts, your Amazons, and your Googles, and your Teslas, who are all investing lots of money into this particular sphere. And it's driving this kind of technological resurgence of artificial intelligence, which we are seeing. What's happening currently is it's becoming much more prevalent and open to organizations, businesses, clients, and project managers and project professionals. So I spoke earlier about the kind of infancy. What we are going to see is, as this kind of technology, which currently is quite expensive to run in terms of the data servers that have to obviously generate the code, and the software developers that are all behind it. But what I do see in terms of our field, project management, in terms of the next 3 to 5 years, is we're going to see a resurgence, or a kind of explosion of tools that will help project managers with tasks such as scheduling, for example. We're going to see an explosion of tools in terms of intelligent risk prediction, for example. We're going to see things around resource allocation. So these, in my mind, in terms of your 3 years, will be the types of tools that certain project professionals will be well versed in using in previous iterations. But that added ingredients of AI will just make them ever so slightly smarter, and will enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of those kind of scheduling. It will make risk management. I do foresee a huge increase in terms of how it's going to improve risk management, and it will obviously help project professionals mitigate those areas. Yeah. So going into the kind of next level, which would be the 5 to 10 years, my academic and professional, when I'm trying to marry those two worlds together, prediction was that we'll see much more ubiquity in terms of AI-powered project management tools that can help project management with a higher degree of complexity or a high degree of complex tasks, such as then we'll go into project planning, project execution, and monitoring. And I foresee AI becoming much more adept at automating those repetitive tasks, which in my view will be there to free up the project manager's time to focus on much more strategic level tasks rather than this argument that we hear from time to time about will it replace me or will it replace my job?
Yeah. And yet you've already given an example of a chatbot replacing a project manager. So, will we see PM chatbots supervising project teams?
Well, I mean, that is one aspect that. So I don't know whether it would replace the project manager's manager in that particular case. I would assume that individual in that case would have. I'm not sure whether that role would have existed or whether that person would have been potentially trained on to or released to do other things. Or it could be that manager is obviously overseeing a greater deal of project managers.
You've laid out perhaps a roadmap of the level of sophistication of AI in terms of the kind of data driven.
So I think in terms of communication. Now there is a bit of a rabbit hole that we could go down which is this idea of artificial intelligence. But I think what would be really interesting for everybody listening is that AI isn't just this one kind of all-encompassing element. Now when we start to scratch beneath the surface and go into the different layers, there are different aspects that I think, such as machine learning. There is one element of artificial intelligence which is growing very rapidly, which is the concept of generative artificial intelligence. Yeah. And you and I, before our meeting today, had a quick chat about some of these elements. And you mentioned, for example, photo editing with Midjourney, DALL-E, and things like that, and Stable Diffusion, which is an open source aspect of it.
Just for the benefit of the audience, would you give a kind of thumbnail description or definition of what you mean when you use the term generative AI?
So yes, I can, in a couple of sentences actually. So what your traditional AI is a very good analytical tool. It's very good. So human beings, we are fairly good at analyzing certain aspects, and AI can supersede that unquestionably in terms of analyzing large sets of data. And actually, that was one of the things that we were very interested in when we did this AI and project management study. Yeah. Now, what human beings are also very good at, or some of us, is being innovative and creative. And actually, some of those things AI can really, until recently, struggle with. Now, back in 2015, Google released a research paper, and off the back of that, there has been this kind of surge, this wave into generative AI, which is more associated with this idea of generating ideas or generating text or generating images, for example. And off the back of that, what we've seen in 2022 is large organizations. For example, you can generate images from text prompts, for example. So you could type in, sunny day on the beach, and people playing volleyball, for example. And that's all you'd have to do. And the artificial intelligence would, through elements of machine learning, generate that text prompt into an image.
And it's worth saying there are now YouTubers I'm aware of who are generating some of their scripts using generative AI. Of course, we talk about that as being creative, but really what it is doing is it is learning from a data set. In the case of the images, I suppose, the data set would be something like Google Images. It's assimilating all the images and all the labels and text attached or associated with those images, so that when you say volleyball on the beach, it's just recalling thousands and thousands of images and mashing them up. So, and that's not to say there isn't an element of creativity, because we know that humans create things by mashing up ideas. Lots of our best inventions as a species have come from mixing and matching different things. So generative AI is becoming pervasive now in our culture. In fact, who's to say that you aren't really just a generated script and a deep fake?
But I mean, one thing that I would say is I'm not sure I completely agree with you in terms of, it is regurgitating what it's. I mean, to some degree, yes, it has learned from what us as humans I've done.
Yeah.
But I think it's more of a philosophical question, like whether what it's creating, is it new? But the point is, anyway, there's this interaction between us as human beings and this kind of machine learning environment, this generative artificial intelligence, which is able to interpret what we thinking into something tangible, whether it's a script, whether it's a video, whether it's an image, and so on and so forth. And the point I was trying to make earlier was how is that for us as project managers useful in essence? And what it is enabling us to do is to create that kind of better connection between us and the artificial intelligence. Because it's no good having this potential tool that can help with efficiency, planning, risk management, and so on and so forth, if we don't have an intuitive way to communicate with it. So I think generative AI really plays an important part between that relationship between us as project professionals and how useful we're going to see artificial intelligence being for us.
Yeah. I mean, it will be nice, won't it, to have, a dedicated kind of version of Siri or Alexa that actually understands our project environment. And you can just simply say, just as currently our sponsors may say to us as project managers, when are we expecting the next iteration of the software to be delivered? We can just say to our AI assistant, when are we expecting it to be delivered? And it will reply 3 weeks, 2 days, 6 hours and 10 minutes. Or something. So that's really interesting. And I suppose the generative part, the creativity, is about combining. One of the things AI is not good at the moment is doing more than one thing. Human beings, we can do different things. We can learn to play a sport. We can learn to follow an artistic endeavor. We can follow our profession. We've got multiple talents. AI at the moment tends to be single purpose, but I think the real benefit of generative AI, as I understand it, will be its ability to combine different things. And so we might start to see multi-purpose AIs, just as we've got our project management information systems that do lots of things now, rather than the simple old technologies that we had in the 90s and early 2000s that, did one thing well. Maybe we will see AI that has multiple capabilities. What's your thought on that?
Well, Mike, let me ask you a very, very quick question. Going back to one, I want to pick you up on something that you said, which was very interesting and current in terms of, you said, AI is good at dealing with one thing and it's good at learning. Let me ask you a quick question. And so, in your opinion, how long do you think it would take? How many years would you consider somebody to have been a senior project professional? And just give me kind of like a time range in terms of
to reach the point where they might be considered a senior project.
Yeah,
I can't remember the details of my little kind of paper I did on it, but actually I think in terms of maybe 3 years of a kind of junior project manager apprenticeship and then a kind of practicing project manager, maybe another 2 to 5 years, depending on the type of experience. So I suppose after maybe 5 to 10 years, somewhat depending on the kind of experience and the breadth and the depth of experience you have, people might start to regard you as being a senior project manager. I think that's probably the bottom end of that is what the professional associations would expect as a kind of being ready to take their highest tier of certifications. So and I guess AI could gain all of that experience in an hour.
Well, maybe not an hour, but the point I was going to make is so I recently read a research paper that spoke exactly, discussed exactly the idea of how quickly can artificial intelligence learn something specific from 0 to 100, and in terms of years. And it was a fascinating piece of research. So effectively, they'd had this kind of sim, this virtual character in this environment. And they wanted to teach this virtual character through simulation and through machine learning and artificial intelligence from the point of 0, so not even being able to stand, to the point of being able to defend itself in a fight, for example.
Yeah.
And so they ran this artificial intelligence and this machine learning software constantly, 24 hours a day, and so on and so forth. And, it's quite interesting to see the early stages where, it stands up and it falls down immediately and so on and so forth, and how long it would take. if I remember, when my children were born, in terms of how many years it took them to go from crawling to toddling to actually walking, this is quite a long amount of time. And as we said, in terms of a project professional, becoming a senior project professional, I would agree. I'd say a decade of project management would get you to that particular point. Now, I'm not down to an hour, but certainly artificial intelligence was able, in this particular case, with a sim character, to effectively, I think it was employ something like 30 years worth of learning, so that the sim character would be absolutely proficient and expert in certain fighting styles, for example, in this simulation, down to a month, essentially.
I know Kung Fu. Show me.
So when you consider the potential of this machine learning, this artificial intelligence, to absorb 30 years worth of experience down to a matter of weeks, that to me, as an academic and as a project professional, is incredibly interesting to see where it's going to take us.
Yeah. Well, it'll be your professor. You can correct me all you like around, is it a month or is it an hour? But what we know is that, firstly, we've got a tremendous rate of growth of development of AI coding and our understanding of how to build AIs and to program them and to build the hardware they sit on is growing rapidly. Plus, of course, we've got Moore's law, which is telling us that our ability to process information gets faster and faster every day. So it might be a month. Well, it might have been a month when this study was done. I can't recall when you said it was, but a year or two ago, maybe. But possibly, in 5 years' time, it will be. It'll get its 10,000 hours of experience in human time in a computer elapsed time of literally an hour. Who knows? It is a phenomenal time. And all this kind of begs the question, which is, what's this going to do to the profession? What impact do you foresee? I mean, obviously there are the wild speculations, the far edge of what is potentially likely, and then there's the kind of closer speculations of what is almost certain. So start us off with where you feel comfortable to say this is pretty much going to happen, and then spread that and then stretch us out a little bit and excite us with some of the real potential that's there.
So the impact is really interesting. So in terms of, before answering that question, in terms of a preface, so we asked that very question in our research, and we said, how likely is AI to change the role of project managers? And the respondents from the survey was 48% of project professionals realized or stated that actually AI is very likely to change the profession, the role of project managers, and 24% said it was extremely likely. And then we went into a further question, which is, okay, great. So how likely is that AI, in your mind, will become an important tool for project managers? And again, it was 45% very likely and 29% very likely. So in answer to your question, in essence, in terms of considering okay, well, what is the impact and what will it have on the project profession? I think in terms of one of the things that we will see is that project managers will need to adapt quickly to changing environments in terms of who they work with and who their team is.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because it's very likely that at some point, project managers will have a team that not only consists of human beings, but also of AI-powered software or AI-powered team members, whichever kind of form that takes. So I think that will be an interesting element to it, that project managers will increasingly have team members that constitute of human beings and obviously AI professionals, if you want, as well. So I think my advice would be in that environment is that project professionals want to be comfortable with using AI tools to help with these particular environments. But also I think it will, as I said earlier, have an impact on schedule, risk management, and resource allocation.
Yeah.
Because I think those are the kind of things or elements that AI will be very good and efficient at analyzing and suggesting a range of different kind of scenarios for the project manager to act upon.
Yeah. Let me get political for a moment. You may kind of bat me away and say you don't want to engage in this one because that would be fair. But one of the things we know about human beings is we are tremendously good at discriminating. and we're tremendously good at building prejudices. And we are living in a time where, to a large extent, in our culture, your culture and my culture, a lot of those discriminations and prejudices, whilst they haven't gone away, we recognise them, and a lot of people are working hard to overcome them. Gender, race, sexual orientation, all of that. You mentioned having an AI team member.
Mm.
And of course, probably like me, you've seen your fair share of science fiction movies and TV series. Prejudice against AI team members? Is that something that has reared its ugly head in any of the research you've done or thinking you've done?
So I think there's two elements to that question. The first one is, will there be any sort of resistance or any sort of prejudice to working with the AI? But I also think the flip side of that is, will the AI itself have any kind of prejudice as well in terms of how it interprets its working relationships with colleagues, team members, and how it will judge them, and so on and so forth. So I think to the first point, what some research that me and my colleagues also did is that we said actually one of the most important element for any project is the people anyway. And as part of that, we looked at what's called dynamic conditions for project success, and we listed a number of different dimensions which we attributed to enhance or encourage project outcomes. Yeah. And as part of that, one of the key elements that emerged was the idea of diversity. Yeah. And so if you marry those two ideas together, where you think, okay, well, actually people are the most important part of the project, and diversity amongst some other dimensions is also an important part of it. But why is diversity important? Well, it's diversity because it can obviously bring novel ideas. It can be diversity of creative, or the diversity of argument, for example. Yeah. And I think one of the worst things we can do is work in a sort of an echo chamber, which might obviously make the project a failure. So I think if the AI brings an element of diversity to the project team in terms of our prejudice, then we could find it useful. Very, very simply as well. If we have a project professional who goes, well, I don't like the idea of working with a robot, or I don't like the idea of working with some sort of artificial intelligence, I think very much what the organization or the project would have to demonstrate is, what is the value to the team and the project professional of the AI? Once you can demonstrate that, then my sense is it would help to overcome those barriers of prejudice. Because if, as a project professional, I can look at this artificial intelligence and go, what use do I get out of it? What value is it to me? Oh, it solves X, Y, and Z. Brilliant. I think it would help to lower those. The flip side, as I said earlier, was, well, what if the AI is prejudice itself? And there is some research to say where they've used, for example, artificial intelligence algorithms in certain legal settings, and to help judges come to a conclusion as to like a length of sentences and things like that. And it found that within certain demographics, it would be more kind of stricter and things like that. I think that's obviously more of a question for the people who are developing the code in terms of how the AI should interpret the data, for example. A machine, in terms of our understanding, is going to be impartial up until the moment a line of code is fed into it, and then it's going to interpret it based on that.
The computers are going to inherit the biases that their programmers present them with, whether it's biases in the coding structure or biases in the data set. And we know about that. I think that's interesting, though. It had never occurred to me that computers might say, look, these kind of soft, squidgy human intelligences, they're not as clever as we are. So why should we listen? But the other thing that's interesting to me in what you said is, and actually I'm not sure I buy into the fact that a reasoned argument that a computer can contribute positively to a project will overcome bias and discrimination as if by magic, because I'm old enough to remember having colleagues for whom the argument that women would contribute positively to a project was not enough to get them to feel comfortable with having women around in the workplace. I mean, and I find it quite shocking that I'm old enough to remember that, because it's not that long ago. I'm not that old. But if, as you imply, and I certainly believe, one of the strengths of a diverse team comes out when we encourage respectful dispute. I will take on your arguments and I will argue against them, and that conflict itself is generative, to use a word we've already been using. But if someone then steps in and says, yes, but the AI is right because it's got all the data and it's got a better brain, are there risks down that route?
So I think it's about making informed decisions at that particular point. So I think that the key within the organization at the strategic level is about understanding, or within the project, it's about understanding who fulfills what role, essentially. And if the decision-making power is with the project professional and the AI is there to enhance that process, then I think that's how it fits together. That's how I would certainly see it. In terms of whether the AI has the final say, it's not something I'm familiar with. It's not something that I think is yet on the horizon. It's not something that I've heard of. If we think in terms of, I wrote a paper a couple of years ago about this idea of process paralysis and what artificial intelligence could do to help kind of that buffer example where the project professional is overloaded with data or tasks or whatever it may be. And the analogy I used was very much in terms of what happens in the cockpit of a plane during the time of a crisis. And then you've got all these alarms blaring at you and making all sorts of noises and so on and so forth. And what can happen is a pilot can be overcome by process paralysis. So I think in terms of decision-making processes, the pilot always is always in charge, if you like. The good software is written to the point where the person, which is the most important aspect of the project, whatever it may be, is in charge. So I'm not aware of a situation where, for example, artificial intelligence would override that particular decision at the more strategic level. My view is very much, philosophically, academically, and professionally, is very much AI is a tool that will help to enhance the project profession. Yeah. That's very much my view in terms of the research and what I've been exposed to and what people's anticipations are. I don't think anybody is yet at a level where they would feel comfortable saying, right, fine, the project's going to be run 100% by artificial intelligence and will be its minion, for example.
Yeah. Yet. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? So take us out to the wilds of your speculation. Mm-hmm. Where could we be if we're sitting looking back at this interview 20, 30 years time and having a good laugh at Nicholas's predictions? Where do you think we'll be the profession in let's say 2050?
So that's obviously quite a tricky estimation to make. What I can say, I'm not sure I'm ready to obviously kind of forecast where we'll be in 30 or so years. But what I will say, certainly, and this is for me, this is a really important kind of piece of advice that I would share out, is that, in my view, the early adopters will be the winners, and really project professionals, project organizations, the ones that want to succeed and not get left behind, the ones that want to really kind of innovate and be at the forefront of this kind of technological revolution, if you like. Mm-hmm. Really, my advice to them was embrace it, adapt it, and essentially innovate off it to kind of embrace this technology, be one of the first movers in this particular field. A colleague of mine recently said, who's a project professional, said, AI right now is like the Wild West. Yeah. Everybody's kind of fighting their little corner. Nobody knows what's exactly going on, and nobody knows where it's going to lead to. And my advice certainly would be, think about what the pain points are in your current processes. Think about where you would like to increase your efficiencies. How would you like to become more effective in your day-to-day running on your strategic level, so on and so forth. Think about what the needs are of the project to begin with. Think about what the needs are of the organization. Once you've identified those key elements, then consider how artificial intelligence can enhance or overcome some of those challenges to make you, as an organization or as a project professional, much more effective and also much more sustainable in terms of going forward into the long-term future. So in terms of a prediction, I would certainly see that there are going to be 1 or 2 or 3 big players in this particular field, which will have a huge impact going forward. I think the ones that aren't going to do so well are the ones that potentially will dither, will show some resistance to it, will have some unfounded fears around some movie that we may have watched, 50 years ago, whatever it may be. But I do think there are opportunities. It was almost like a gold rush at the minute. And those organizations which can establish themselves on quality and value early on are going to be the ones that succeed.
That's an interesting metaphor, the Wild West. The thing that worries me about that metaphor is the Wild West was a dangerous place to go. You were taking your life in your hands if you took that risk. To me, it seems, and maybe there are risks, but to me, it seems more like the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, where the factories who took this stuff on in the face of Luddites, who took on steam power because there wasn't because there was a drought and there wasn't enough water power, they became some of the big names of certainly of the 19th century, maybe not into the 20th and 21st. But these are big changes, and you and I are totally in agreement that those who embrace the potential and make some smart but courageous decisions about investing are going to be the ones who have a chance of coming out of this ahead. If you don't invest anything in this, you're not. But let's bring this down to the project managers who are watching this, many of whom are at the start of their careers and therefore are primed to travel out to the Wild West and build a career and build a future on this. What advice would you have for a project manager who wants to prepare themselves for all of the opportunities? And for the sake of the audience, I think I would identify the 2 big opportunities being using AI as a tool to make you a better project manager, to enhance your professionalism in some way, but also recognizing that just as I grew up as a project manager with the opportunity to be involved in a whole load of regulatory projects and in a whole load of early internet projects and early enterprise resource planning projects, all of which are now bread and butter projects. So there's 2 opportunities to be a better project manager, but also there are projects to be done where organizations are embracing AI and need project managers to help them do it. What should project managers be doing to prepare themselves to take advantage of these and other opportunities?
So I think project managers should actually be doing what they are historically very good at doing, and which they've been doing for a number of years, which is basically doing lots of reading, doing lots of staying afloat of the latest technologies, reading certain articles, reading the research that's relevant to them, and accumulating and absorbing as much knowledge as they possibly can. So staying ahead of understanding what the trends are. The good thing is, for those project professionals out there who are actually watching, this conversation that you and I are having, this is almost step 1 for them, understanding what is the technology, what can it mean, and what further resources are there. It's all about, in terms of upskilling. Gone are the days where we used to just learn something and then it was essentially entrenched and we never had to kind of develop our skills going forward. That just simply doesn't happen. We kind of move forward in terms of expectations from clients, complexity of projects, and so on and so forth. So my biggest advice would certainly to keep a close eye on what types of technologies and AI opportunities are opening up. You could go a step further. Those who have the time and inclination to learn, for example, some of the code behind these sorts of artificial intelligence and machine learning, who could invest a little bit of time in terms of learning Python, for example, that would be a huge boost in terms of their employability, their CV, and being able to demonstrate on a small scale what they've done in the past and achieved. So I think it is in terms of just keeping abreast of the research, but keeping obviously their skills and investing in terms of their development around that.
Yeah, that's good advice. I think it just rings true and reminds me of my time when I embraced year 2000. I went to a briefing, learned about year 2000. I thought it could be interesting. Got staffed onto a project and enjoyed that project, and then was offered another one, which I then took over and led. And so, that works really well. One of the questions my audience has asked me, or members of my audience have asked me, so I'm going to ask you because you're the expert. If I want to read about this sort of stuff, if I want to get myself informed, what are some of the sources you would recommend people go to, aside from your excellent publications for the APM?
Well, inevitably, in terms of the research we did for the APM in terms of artificial intelligence and project management, I would certainly advise that. And the reason is because this is not just conceptual research, which we're just pulling out of thin air. This is research which is based with engaging with the project professional, speaking to people, engaging in large-scale surveys, and so on and so forth. I dare say I probably wouldn't advise this a few years ago, but actually some of the more interesting stuff is coming through YouTube itself as well, which is really quite interesting in terms of the research, and people are giving up their free time to share their knowledge. Previously, you might have gone to a TEDx, for example. The other thing is a great resource is obviously publications that are coming through in terms of the International Journal of Project Management, the Project Management Journal, the other one, which is the International Journal of Managing Projects in Business as well. I'm aware that there are some additional research coming out there. Myself and a range of colleagues are trying to publish in this particular field. LinkedIn is also a really good place for this sort of initiative in terms of learning. Twitter is also obviously in terms of engaging directly with data analysts, CEOs, and finding out what's going on in terms of the...
That's assuming Twitter's still there when this goes out.
Well, I didn't want to say anything, but yes, absolutely. It depends whether, we will see. We will see. We'll see what happens.
So are there any commentators that you would recommend? Because again, some of the journal articles, some of the journals you mentioned, if you don't have access to a university library, as most of us don't from day to day, although more people do than think they do, because if you went to university, there's a chance you can still access your old university library online. I know I can with one of my universities. But any kind of trusted sources you go to in terms of commentators or organizations who are putting good knowledge up on their websites?
Yeah, I mean, I think in many ways in the UK, we are very fortunate to have the Association for Project Management in terms of they have a range of special interest groups or SIGs around the country. And there's a lot of knowledge that's disseminated through those particular in-person, or whether it's on Zoom or Teams. So there is obviously lots of access that you can get for free, and you can sign up for membership and so on and so forth. Yeah. There are also obviously the project management institutes that you can access freely in some of their research, and I would advise that. In answer to your question, is there a single person who I would recommend?
No, I'm not saying a single person, but just anybody. Are there people you would recommend?
It's difficult to really kind of, because what we have is lots of knowledge around AI, but it's more challenging and succinct when we talk about artificial intelligence and project professionals and those types of organizations. I mean, obviously there are a number of consultants and companies out there on the landscape, but my worldview is very much academia and engaging with industry and trying to build up those kind of relationships.
Okay. Talking about your worldview, is there anything like any little snippets that you have up your sleeve that I should have asked you about that you wanted to share with the group that you think they'd be value from?
Yeah, I think one of the questions that is quite important is what should I not do in terms of what would be the pitfalls and what would be the problems? And I think the biggest red flag of any project professional or any organization, which unfortunately I do foresee, there will be a number of companies, organizations that will be tempted by this, which goes down to, well, my competitors are doing this. Maybe I need to jump on the bandwagon and kind of just, without thinking back to the original point I made earlier, which was, what is the point of it in terms of your processes? How is it what challenges or pain points are you trying to overcome? I think where there's going to be some quite harsh failures, costly failures, is where the use of artificial intelligence hasn't been thought of well enough, and we're just adopting the technology for the sake of it because everybody else is doing it. Therefore, I feel like this is something that I must have. And I think there's a real danger there of not thinking carefully about how it enhances the project itself and what benefits it can bring. And I think that could be a real kind of pitfall, unfortunately.
Yeah. So it's about being strategic.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
So, Nicholas, this has been brilliant. So if anybody wants to find out a bit more about what you're doing, your research, or engage with you, what are the best ways to do that?
So my handle is at Nicholas Dacre. So you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram, which I don't tend to use that much. Or you can obviously reach out to me via the university portal, and my details at the University of Southampton, Nicholas Dacre. And there you'll find my email address and contact phone number. And one of the things that I personally absolutely really relish is engaging with project professionals and project organizations in terms of an academic setting. And we do a lot of kind of cross pollination in terms of our work and our research. And we help through our research, we can obviously engage with research grants. We help startups, established companies, large conglomerates, and so on and so forth. But yeah, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram.
As always, take a look at the description, and all Nicholas's contacts will be in there. Nicholas, it has been absolute delight and a big education, and possibly little, what's the word I'm looking for? Spark of inspiration that things are going to get better for project managers, with more focus on strategic stuff and less focus on chasing your staff for their expense forms and stuff.
I think if we can increase our bandwidth, I think if we can use AI to increase our bandwidth, that will be a huge W.
It's what we as a profession have been asking for as long as I've been around, and I've always said, first it was the IT professionals wanted a seat at the top table, then it was the HR professionals, and now it's us. Now we want the seat at the top table. And when we get the time to focus on strategy to a greater degree, I think that will come. So thank you very much for talking us through artificial intelligence project management. Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you ever so much.
Please do give us a thumbs up if you like this video. I'll be creating loads more great project management content, so please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of it. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.